honorables, distinguished guests, good afternoon. It's an honor to be here and moderating this panel discussion on migration and brain drain. Well, I see a lot of faces in the room wondering what is brain drain, what is she talking about? How many of you are familiar with this term, brain drain? Yeah? It sounds a bit scary, but it's actually very simple. It refers to the situation where very talented, highly skilled people migrate from one country to another in search for economic opportunities, among other things. And some economists will argue that this is one of the biggest challenges facing developing countries. And we're going to discuss that in a few moments and demystify those terms. But you know, nowadays, in a time where really the global population is facing challenges really never seen before, we are looking at the the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences on the economy, the climate change, and it's becoming worrisome, geopolitical tensions and security threat, and all that is pushing millions of more people to move and leave their homes. So every day we are looking at thousands of people that migrate, that really are in danger. They leave, some of them are refugees that leave warm zones, others are just in search for better opportunity, better schools for the kids, or better healthcare. So the question is, how an effective global approach to migration look like? What are we supposed to do as Africa? And also how we can see that migration of movement of people as an opportunity instead of seeing it as a threat, security threat that has to be contained. So to unpack all those discussions, I'm very honored to call upon my very good panel of practitioners. So as I will be introducing them, I will be asking them to join me here. So let me call upon Professor Isaac Olawale from the University of Ibadan. We are very fortunate to have Professor with us. He has established, of course, he's known to have established a couple of works, including the Master and PhD degree program at the University of Ibadan on peace and conflict studies. As he's joining us, please join me in welcoming Professor, a very talented research associate. I'm very honored as well to welcome Dr. Musonda Mumba. She's the Secretary General of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Doctor, welcome. She's very well known. She has 25 years of global experience in environmental management. She supported the Italian government with the G20 peace during the Italy presidency and the COP26 co-presidency. So welcome, please, Dr. Musonda. And also you have all the bios on the book, page 21, so if you want to hear more about the work, please do so. Very honored to welcome Ambassador Monique Mukaruliza. She's our Migration and Economic Partnership Coordination. Please join me in welcoming her. Ambassador Mukaruliza for the government of Rwanda. And finally, I'm very privileged to call upon Dr. Ozonnia Ojielo. Do I have to introduce him? Yes? Okay, Dr. Ozonnia. Please join us. You're the UN resident coordinator in Rwanda and a representative for the Secretary General in Rwanda. Thank you so much. So as we kick off this conversation, as I have been saying, migration and brain drain, there has been a lot of controversy and debate on this subject, and I really want us to ask the right questions. And I would like to start with Professor Albert. Professor Albert, you bring an academic outlook of the discussion. I would like you to kind of outline for us how you see the situation on migration. What are, according to you, the push and the pull factors? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the college for inviting me and, in the process, enabling me to meet some old friends that I've not met several years ago. One of them is General Gumba, who is the senior, commandant of the Senior Command and Staff College in Uganda. Now the question, that I'm asked to answer is to look at the push and pull factors of migration. But I think the first thing is to key into the definition of brain drain by my honorable sister here. It has to do with a society losing its best brains to outside world. And for this meeting, I want to call attention to 3 or 4 strategic types of brain drain that we are witnessing in Africa. The most acknowledged in extant literature is when educated people decide to leave their countries in search of what is called greener pasture. Mm-hmm. And Africa is hemorrhaging on this. Several people are leaving Africa. It is acknowledged by the World Bank, acknowledged by different organizations across the globe. People are leaving. The second type of brain drain has to do with sending our children abroad to school and then writing back home to say, Dad, I'm not returning to Africa. It is happening every day. The third one, which is very subtle, has to do with characters like Professor Albert. You decided not to leave Africa, but your best academic ideas are located in the developed world. You are in Africa, but you are not better than those who have left. And the reason being that those inviting you to share their academic ideas with them are not located in Africa. So if you Google search Isaac Olawale Albert today, you will find me in Harvard, in Yale, and less of me in Nigeria. So my situation is worse than those who have left because the best of my ideas are not used in Africa. Now the question she asked is, what are the push and pull factors? The push factors are the factors why people are running away from our countries. Why are people running away from Africa? Push factors. The first one, I think, has been addressed by the first panel. Weak institutions, bad governance, inability of educated people to meet their basic needs. And there is a theoretical position that says that talent will go in the direction in which it is appreciated and compensated. So if you produce talent in your country and you are not ready to recognize the talent, you are not ready to reward the talent, then the talent will go abroad. Now let's go to the pull factors. The pull factors have to do with the attractions in the countries that we flee to. You know, knowledge is appreciated, the environment is conducive for knowledge dissemination, and therefore people leave. So let me stop there so I don't take too much time.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Quite an important element you have shared with us, Professor, on the pull factor in terms of having good governance and attractions. I would like to link up with Dr. Ozonnia from the UN, because UN is a critical partner when it comes to really pulling together the strain. I wanted to know from you, what are your thoughts on this? What is your experience on migration and brain drain?
Thank you, Moderator. General Kazura, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think the first point I'd like to make is that migration is an African issue. And so those who champion it globally, as if it's a big deal for them, it's actually a microcosm of what Africa is experiencing, that most of the migrants are located in Africa. And linked to that is that most migrants would normally, when they leave their countries, they don't go to Europe or North America. They go to a neighboring country. And when they find that opportunities are not available as they would want in the neighboring country, that's when they want to leave the region. So the first issue is that it's an African problem. The second is that often is linked to the our inability to leverage the opportunities that Dr. Albert has identified in terms of the opportunities in education, but also beyond education on skilling. That as African countries say we are developing countries, one of the biggest needs are for human capital. And a lot of the migrants that are coming from neighboring countries have tremendous capital resources, human capital resources that we're not leveraging. So the question of skilling then becomes important. And then linked to skilling is a story that a former president of Malawi, Bingu wa Mutharika, told a couple of years ago, that he invested a lot of money in training nurses for Malawi. But where are those nurses? They're all in Europe. So despite the significant investment in human capital, they've left. But why have they left? They have left because conditions at home, the idea of skilling has not matched up with the living conditions, the prosperity agenda that we want to deliver to our citizens. Dr. Albert will say to you, when we were in college in Nigeria in the early 1980s, our tuition fee for a year was about $1. The accommodation fee for 1 year was about $3. The government of Nigeria invested in your tuition, in your feeding, whether you were doing undergrad, master's, or PhD. But the preponderance of the African expatriates in the world today are actually from Nigeria. The third issue is linked to the question of the remittances and the resources that are coming from our migrants and how we can use that strategically in terms of developing our continent. And the fourth is the whole question of security. There's a narrative that's anti-migrants. That narrative, of course, is much stronger now in parts of Europe, but is speculating in many parts of Africa, in Southern Africa, a strong anti-migrant narrative. So my question to all of us is, what are we afraid of? And I'd like to come back to this point later. My fifth point relates to social justice, that the 85% of the economy of Africa is in the informal sector. And so how do we give people a sense of ownership, a sense of dignity in their own communities, that they have jobs that are decent jobs that allows them to fulfill their aspirations at the individual, the community, and the family levels. So as we engage in the discourse on jobs, the question of what kind of jobs then becomes important. And then, of course, I want to talk about issues around regional integration. You know, for many of our countries, if you look at the national development strategies, each one of them is very strong on the idea of socio-economic structural transformation. But for many of us in Africa, that transformation is not possible unless you're investing significantly in regional integration. And regional integration is both about trade, but also about peaceful relations, about community resilience, community coherence, social cohesion between you and your neighbors. So that's an important issue. Then the seventh point I want to highlight is about the global compact of migration. Why did the world community come together to design the global compact of migration? The logic is very simple, that you can have safe and orderly migration. And so the one that is illegal migration, you can have cooperation with member states to deal with them. Now, many countries in the world were signing on to the global compact and not implementing the tenets of the global compact. So many Africans, this spirit of brotherhood, this principle of Ubuntu is making governments in Africa allow people from the community to enter into our societies. And so that's the logic of the direction for travel of where we should go. You know, UNDP a couple of years ago did a study. They interviewed African migrants in Europe. They wanted to find out what led you to go away, but why are you not coming home? And the study was quite fascinating. So in addition to the contextual factors, the push and pull factors that Professor Albert has talked about, what was significant is that when they arrive in an European country, the constraints to migrants settling are so significant that it takes them on average 15 to 25 years before they can settle in Europe. And once they have left, they don't want to go home, because when they go home, it's a sign of failure. So they spend the 15 to 25 years trying to show that they have succeeded. It is only after they have succeeded that they make their first visit home in glory to be recognized and appreciated by the people. So there's a fundamental question about our partnership with countries in Europe and North America, about the discourse of migration. When you close your borders, more will come and the longer they will stay. And when we ask them, would you like to go home? They would love to go home as quickly as possible if they could just get the settlement that they like. To come back to the question I asked earlier, what are we afraid of? Because the narrative is that migrants are threats, they're security threats. In 2016, in an earlier life in UNDP, when I was the director for governance and peace building in Africa, I led a study on the journey to extremism, the tipping point to violence. And one of my staff members is here. She was part of that study, Efozia Abdi. And we interviewed people linked to terrorism in the prisons in Somalia, in Kenya, people linked to the Islamic State in Sudan, in my home country, Nigeria, in Niger, and in Chad. And many things came through. Most of them don't understand the Quran. They don't even speak Arabic. Most of them have very limited basic forms of education. Most of them were recruited by offering of some money, 500 shillings in some cases. But ultimately, most of them were, this gave me a sense of dignity, a sense of importance, a sense of recognition. But the more fundamental issue that more than 50% of them raised about what caused them to make that transition from normal members of society to those engaging in extremism was government action. Multiple defined in various ways about government action. So the question then is that we can, by our own policies, the nature of governing, the nature of social relations in society, community development, how we transform our societies, giving people a stake in their societies, we can transform those opportunities. And the evidence is that most migrants actually will not engage in migration if those elements are present. When they have a stake in the society, when they have a stake in the economy, they don't want to pull it down because that's where their livelihood is buttered. So I think my final point would then be that many of those risks that we associate with migrants can actually be effectively addressed. Effective security cooperation, effective cross-border cooperation, effective governance, and then, of course, just noting the fact that that migration cannot be stopped.
Absolutely.
It's inevitable. The trends are all over the place. So if we embrace it and use it well, we can transform our societies. And then to apologize that I was conscripted into this panel an hour before it started. So I am sorry if I haven't responded to all of the key questions.
Yeah, thank you for joining us indeed. I know you have to leave in a few minutes, but thank you. You have touched on a very compelling elements that we're going to unpack in a few minutes. But I wanted to come back at the global stage, global efforts being made, and go to the Dr. Musonda. Dr. Musonda, I would be curious to hear on the global efforts, global treaties. Can you give us a bit of background on the Ramsar Convention on wetlands, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. It's an absolute honor to be here, and congratulations to the Rwanda Defense Forces on your 10th anniversary. It's just really an honor to be here. But also, I also want to send condolences to the people of Rwanda and what's happening in many parts of Rwanda and really this region, the degradation and also the impacts of climate change we've seen with floods and landslides and all of that. And that brings me to the very nature of our existence. I'm sure we all had a glass of water. We have some water in front of us. And I'm hoping people are not assuming this water just came from the bottle and from the tap. Because most of your countries, if not all of them, are contracting parties of the Convention on Wetlands, for which I'm the Secretary General. It is the oldest and the most experienced multilateral environmental agreement focusing on rivers, wetlands, ecosystems. In fact, last November, during COP14 in Geneva, Kigali City was accredited as a wetland city. I think we should give an applause for that one. If you have not seen Nyandungu Wetland Center, please make time to see it, because you will understand how the very development of a city is so important, and I will touch on the issue of migration and mobility and also brain drain in relation to cities and wetlands. Now, our convention, for all intents and purposes, is a global convention. In our lifetime, we have seen how wetland systems around the world, just look around you, do a Google search on the Aral Sea, which is dry, dry, dry. Look at wetland systems in America. I'll bring it closer to home. You can look at what's happening in the Sahel. Professor Albert was making reference to that. Dr. Ojielo just talked about the work that they did on extremism. Let's talk about Lake Chad region, which for all intents and purposes is actually a wetland of international importance and designated under the Convention on Wetlands, where we've seen dynamics of insurgency. In 2008, when I was working for the United Nations Environment Program, we did a piece of work called Security and Mobility. And it was really to understand how pastoral communities were moving within the Horn of Africa. And for me, my interest was the environmental dynamic, extreme droughts, weather events. Of course, pastoralists will move with over 10,000 herds of cattle to find water. And when I asked the government of Kenya, the government of Uganda, how are you dealing with this movement and how they're going about trying to find water? The first reaction for every single parliamentarian I spoke to, or anybody in the Senate or in the government, was military action. We have to stop them because of small arms. But the trigger of change is climate related, is environmental. And we're beginning to see this convergence now more than ever. Just a few months ago, we had the UN Water Conference, the first in 46 years. I think it's a bit of a shame that the United Nations waited 46 years later to have a conference on the very liquid that is the lifeline of this planet and the very epitome of what I see in documents, be it military or environmental or multilateral, saying water may be the next factor for the next war. So indeed, people move because they have to find a resource. And Madam Moderator, to your question, our convention is really trying as much as possible to deal with issues of restoring and conserving these wetlands. I just arrived yesterday from Uganda, and I was shocked to see that there's a whole bridge that's been cut off for any part of business coming into Kampala, into the capital, to Upper, and also to the neighboring countries, Congo, DRC, mainly because of wetland degradation. We're going to see a lot more of that. But people are also going to move. I want to be on the safer side of things. And as you rightly said, most of this migration is internal. So people are moving inside. In fact, because part of my heritage is both South African and Zambian, our people's moved. My relatives are South African and my father is Zambian. Who am I exactly? We've always moved and culturally mixed. But what is happening now more and more is that our spaces are smaller, our resources are fewer. And then the complexity of the very spaces where our water resources come from are even shrinking a lot more. I'll be happy to speak a lot more to more concrete stuff after that.
Thank you so much. I would love to hear your thought on, indeed, on those intersectoral conversation. Before that, I wanted to also take stock on diaspora engagement. We discussed on why people leave in their countries, but can we see it as an opportunity as well? So let's hear from Ambassador Monique and share some of your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, moderator. I would like also to thank the Rwanda Defense Force Command and Staff College for the invitation. As the previous speakers have highlighted, migration is inevitable, especially in the globalized world. People will leave their country of origin to seek for better opportunities. So what we see is that one of the causes of migration is the imbalance in human capital opportunities. So it is inevitable. But the brain drain, that is part of the topic we are talking about, we can mitigate the effect of brain drain. I can give an example, taking the Rwandan context. Rwanda considers the diaspora or Rwandan living abroad as a very important part of the citizens of the country. Even in the foreign policy of Rwanda, Rwanda community abroad is a pillar of the Rwanda foreign policy. So meaning that Rwanda considers these citizens living abroad as a very important part of the population. And what Rwanda is doing is that it is engaging the Rwandan community living abroad in order to encourage them to contribute to the political and socio-economic development of the country. And this is really happening. It is happening because we see that even the remittances are increasing they are increasing on a very exponential level. And also, you can see that they are sharing the knowledge they have acquired. They are participating in building skills of other Rwandans. In collaboration with IOM, Rwanda has mapped the Rwandan living abroad. In Europe, the mapping has been done in 2018, and now currently we know who is in Europe and what skills these Rwandans have acquired, where they are, and some of them have been encouraged to come and assist in building the skills of other Rwandans. I can say that in the health sector, we have seen Rwandans coming back temporarily and assisting to solve some health issues because they have participated in medical services in different hospitals. They have built capacity in the health sector. So they are sharing the skills they have acquired in the diaspora. We have also Rwandans who are participating in developing the TVET skills. So they are training trainers, and we see that it is very productive and it is contributing to the socio-economic development of Rwanda. The same exercise of mapping the Rwandan diaspora have been done in United States of America and in Canada. So last year, the exercise was completed, and now we know where Rwandans are located. So you understand how important Rwanda has put to the Rwandans living in diaspora. So those Rwandans also, they know that they will also, they are very, very, what can I say? I can say that they are very encouraged, they are very motivated, they are participating in the political and socio-economic programs of the country. They are involved in different decision-making meetings. They know that where they are, Rwanda also is supporting them. Rwanda can assist them. We have seen some cases where Rwanda has evacuated her citizens and even the citizens of Africa because Rwanda knows where Rwandans living abroad are located. So this is part of how Rwanda has encouraged the Rwandan living abroad to participate in the development of the country. So we are benefiting from all the skills, the knowledge, the technology they have acquired where they are living.
Absolutely. I think you touched on, Ambassador Monique, on that. It's not no longer a brain drain, it's a brain gain, right? Brain gain. So I want to touch on as well with Dr. Ozonnia, you touched on the human capital development, and we need to change the narrative. It's no longer a security threat. Can you elaborate more and exchange with us some of your experience?
I think it's on? Yeah, it's on. Thank you very much. So the good news is that these issues have become center stage in international development discourse. I think over the last 2 years, the UN Secretary General has convened multiple political summits. We had the Transforming Educational Summit that took place in New York at the high-level political forum. We also had the Food Systems Summit. So the logic of the Transforming Education Summit is that what is the education, the type of education that Africa needs today? And I think there's a university here in Rwanda that I would like to encourage some of our delegates to go to before they leave. It's called Kepler University.
That's right.
And so it's functional education, skills-based and competency-based. It's not rote learning, it's not cramming. So we need to retransform our educational system so it speaks to the needs of our people. The second, when we talk about skilling, what are the skill sets that Africa needs for the 21st century? And how do we generate the transformation of the sector to be able to meet the needs of Africa? These conversations are actually happening in many parts of Africa, so they're not rocket science. The problem is that many countries are developing new education strategy, TVET and skilling strategies, but the implementation is weak.
That's true.
And even when we have TVET schools, they don't have the equipment. And so the investment, how do you make education attractive as an investment to all kinds of actors in Africa? That these, and then what percentage does education cover in the national budget? Because the idea of human capital development is not just about education, it's also about health, it's about nutrition, it's about social protection. Is that the human being is the nucleus for the socio-economic transformation you want to have. It's not the institutions, it's the human being. And the human being as nucleus, you unleash their creative potentials, and they can come up with all kinds of ideas and resources to help in the transformation. The institutions do help, obviously. And when you look across the continent, you take Rwanda as a perfect example, that yes, the population may be small, but what Rwanda is offering to the rest of the world is see us as proof of concept. See Rwanda as prototype. Yes, it's not a perfect society. No society is perfect. But if you want to come to Africa to transform, begin with Rwanda, look at the region, strengthen Rwanda's engagement with the neighbors for peaceful relations, for trade, because when you unlock those facilities, can you imagine the resources that are available? Last point I want to make, for example, it's a few years ago, if any one of us wanted to travel to a neighboring country in Africa, you have to go to Europe to come back to Africa. And if you look at the resources that are being transferred along that chain, it's frightening. But today we have Rwanda Air, we have Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines has created a subsidiary in West Africa. So you can travel across Africa today without having to go to Europe. So imagine the cascade effect on the economy. So if we implement AFTA very well, African Continental Free Trade Area, and begin to use the resources we have, and for me the perfect example is Botswana. When Botswana went to negotiate with De Beers in the 60s, Botswana went and found the best African expertise wherever he could find it and put them behind themselves in negotiating with De Beers, and they got a great deal. And now they're asking for a renegotiation so they can have majority shareholding. But do you know that over the last 30 years, Botswana has brought in African expertise in the universities, in key sectors of the economy, but with a training and growth plan for Swanese nationals. So now when you go to Botswana, it's the Swanese themselves who are leading all their national institutions. But 15, 20 years ago, many of my friends from Nigeria were professors in the universities in Botswana. So we need not be afraid of our neighbors. We need to embrace what they bring to the system and transform our society, but have a plan for transition that allows us to build up our skills, and then we can move on from there. So many issues that do arise that I'm sure in the plenary open discussion that we can learn from the experience of many colleagues in the room as well.
Indeed. When I hear that, it looks like we know what's the problem. We have a good diagnostic. We have had this conversation for a while, so many years, but I'm still struggling to hear the implementation. You did mention implementation is weak, but what are we supposed to do? What should we tell our security organs here in the room? What can we do differently from today's? I want to come to Dr. Musonda. How can we link and scale and upgrade this problem and be more practical? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I want to go back to the example that I gave on the security and mobility program that we led, early 2000s. The very fact that every member of parliament or people within the defense forces says our first point of action is militarized begins to speak to the very point that even within these constituencies of defense, I don't know if they have environmentalists. I don't know if they have foresters. I don't know if they have ecologists. I don't know if they have people that are talking about environmental economics, etc. The same for our environmental institutions. So where do I see the solutions? Last year when I was actually here for the National Symposium, one of the things I did mention is that, look, it would be very useful. I was in New York in March, and I can tell you, I spoke there, I walked around, I didn't see anyone in uniform apart from the US people, because the US has an arm on environment within the US military. But I didn't see anyone from Africa or from Asia, etc. It would be important that people from the ministries of defense or defense arms sit in conversations such as the climate change COP, because loss and damage, people that are moving because disasters have happened or migrating, which we've seen in the Sahel, which we've seen in Lake Chad, etc. They're moving, whether we want it or not, whether you want to stop small arms, etc. People will move. Sit on those tables. The same is required of the reverse. And I know that environmentalists feel like they shouldn't be on these tables. And it's so funny because I've sat in some conferences, environmental conferences, where we like to talk ourselves and pat ourselves on the back and say, we have some innovative ideas. And some of the most innovative ideas is, shooting these photobombing seeds of trees from drones. And what I know is that most countries, if not all African countries, drone technology is under the military. We're talking about an environmental solution, but we haven't even spoken to the military, who are responsible for the drone technology. So you can see where the disconnect and dislodging happens. I also want to talk a little bit about the databases, and I was so glad that Madam Ambassador Monique spoke to that. We don't know where the databases are sitting. Who is who, where, how, which expert. And I'm so glad that Rwanda has done what they've done. And part of that solution is, if the expertise in Kenya cannot be found, let's look in Rwanda to really guide us. What is happening with migration? What policies? The same way, let's look into the Sahel. Unfortunately, the problem of Africa is also our colonial legacy. I come from Zambia. I have Francophone above and Lusophone on two sides. Already we are divided just by those language constraints. How do we also begin to encourage that we learn some of these aspects, even our traditional languages? I lived in Kenya for so long. Swahili now is becoming a more sort of East and Southern African language. So how do we also think about the communication elements as well? And lastly, I just want to say that I think sitting on the element of intersectionality, whether we like it or not, the environment sits at the center. You can discuss mobility, you can discuss security, you can discuss food system, you can discuss economics. Our economies are driven almost 70 to 80% by the natural resources that we have. And these also begin to be the spaces of conflict. And in closing, one of the things that I experienced when I was the director of the UNDP Rome Center in Rome just over a year and a half ago, when I spoke to the Italian government and how they responded to some of the African migrants, and I spoke to quite a number of Africans in Italy, it was amazing. The average person has a degree and a master's degree. We have lost a huge chunk of young Africans, and as Dr. Ojielo mentioned here, the investment that was made is out there. And how do we bring part of that investment in temporarily, or at least in some form or another? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumba. I think you are right, and I know that the military and security organs are hearing some of the key points you have mentioned on, bringing together more environmentalists, be on the table, and be present in those big meetings. I want to come back to Professor Albert. A lot of it is happening at the global stage, but how do we bring that back to Africa? How can we find solutions that fit for Africa? Thank you, Professor.
Well, thank you. We started by saying that there is nothing that we can do to migration. Migration is not necessarily dysfunctional. It is not something bad, but I think you begin to face a problem when your best brains are leaving your country to other parts of the world that did not contribute to the production of this human capacity. And I think this is the problem we are facing across the world. A prominent Nigerian collapsed some years ago, and his people decided that he would not be treated by a Nigerian doctor. So he was flown out of Nigeria in a private jet. And he confessed to us in the university when he came to give a lecture. When he opened his eyes, the consultant that was leading the other medical doctors to handle him, the white people, was a Nigerian. And he opened his eyes and he saw him. And the man greeted him in Yoruba language to say, calm down, you are in a safe hand. Now the question is, why would anybody fly 8 hours to go and meet those that were rejected at home? Because when you interact with some of these professionals outside, they tell you stories of rejection. Now, they are there, and there is nothing we can do. Even if we gave them scholarship for getting the degree, we cannot stop them from leaving. Because recently, the federal government of Nigeria, just a few months ago, the House of Representatives, the parliament, moved a motion. They wanted to have a national law that will ban Nigerian doctors from leaving. And it was opposed by other Nigerians to say, look, yes, your institutions can train them, but your institution cannot stop them from going wherever they want to go to. Yes. More so that you are not willing to pay them living wages. These doctors are poorly treated. Professors are poorly treated. You cannot force them to wait because the degree certificate they have is a global document. If you give anybody professional certificates, then you have to submit yourself to whatever that person chooses to do with himself. My PhD is a global certificate. When I'm invited to Harvard, I'm invited to any university in the world, they invite me based on my competence. And Nigeria cannot stop me from leaving. Now, they are there. The question we should be asking is, what do we do? One of us actually called attention to the value in diaspora community. One, their remittances, the money they bring back home, add to the national wealth. That is, several papers have been published on that. And in fact, it is said in my country that about 10% of our national revenue comes from diaspora community. But the question I ask, it might be an academic question, but it's a question we should take into consideration. You want their money, but there is no diaspora voting. So you want them to be bringing back money, but where they are, they cannot vote. That fits into our political system. Now, to encourage them to bring more, there's a need for us to take them into consideration in framing the national political discourse. They should have a say in who governs them. Now, the diaspora community also are bringing in intellectual capital in terms of they come for 2-3 months to treat your sick people free. They come in with all kinds of ideas. Well, that is for those who are there. But I think we need to reason more on those who have not left. I, as a person, have decided I will not leave. And many Nigerians see me as a very foolish person because early in my career, I had wonderful opportunities. People were coming to me to say, look, leave. We need you in this institution. I decided not to leave. So what I do is I spend more time abroad than in Nigeria, servicing different institutions. Now, if you don't want my type to leave, or if you don't want my other PhD students to leave, well, ladies and gentlemen, he was my PhD student. He took his PhD under me, and your general here, the deputy commandant of this institution, he was the second best student in his set in Nigeria. So thank you so much for coming to Nigeria. Now, if you don't want them, if they are Nigerians and you don't want them to leave, are you willing to pay them living wages? If you don't pay them living wages, they will leave. Now, the third point that we should take into consideration is what I call recirculation of brain in Africa. He was in charge of UNDP cluster, what in governance, yes, in Ethiopia. And he contributed significantly to Africa using that unit. I have another former student in Ethiopia working with HD, Humanitarian Dialogue. When we had problems with the Eritrea conflict, he was the person that actually created the platform that started the mediation. So the point we are making is that if we are good, how do we take ourselves around the continent of Africa? I acknowledge General Igumba, not just ordinarily. In 2004, the UN in 1999 took me around the world on peacekeeping training. I'm a civilian. That was when the world was thinking of embedding civilians in military operations. So I went around the Middle East. Then the second level of the training brought a number of us around Africa. And when we were in Uganda, General Nguda, I think Igumba, you were Lieutenant Colonel or Colonel then. He was in charge of the program. We went around Africa. Now, the knowledge I got from him and his likes, I've transferred to him, and I've transferred to him. I've transferred to several people. So the question is, how do we actually rebuild, how do we build the capacity of other Africans in the spirit of African solutions to African problems? But I don't think we are working on that.
That's right.
If we have a small project, we think the best consultant must come from New York, the best consultant must come from wherever. Now, that creates the problem of sustainability. So, that is the second point. The third point is that if they are leaving, then we must double our capacity to produce more manpower.
Yeah.
So, your university must admit more people, believing that 50% of them will run away. And then you are able to retain the remaining 50%. So, but my problem is that when I attend continental programs, most especially with politicians, they are not interested in this type of conversation. And as long as you are not interested in conversation around the retention of your best brain, it is not possible to develop Africa because we are in a knowledge economy. Knowledge defines your level of development. And so let me stop at that point.
No, I love it. This is brilliant. And I love the point on knowledge-based economy and how you retain your skills. There's one element we did not touch on, and I would love Dr. Ozonnia to discuss on this, is technology. There's one beautiful thing that COVID has taught us, that you don't have to travel, you don't have to, export your brain. You can produce and work from home and earn more money. So how can we use technology, African countries use technology to retain the skills in Africa, work from Africa, and contribute to the global economy? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. I think the first point that should be an issue of concern for us is how many of our universities still have engaged in research, significant scientific research. Across the continent is worrisome. If you look at recent studies that have been produced, what they say the best 1,000 universities in the world, the indicators are publications, peer-reviewed publications, the number of PhDs you have produced, and research products.
International awards.
And international awards. And in many parts of the continent, our academics are having a bread and butter existence. Because the take-home is insufficient to meet their needs. There was a time, in our time in Nigeria, with all due respect to all the nationalities present, in the 1980s, up to the 1980s in Nigeria, if you went to the United States to study, and it's not in any of the Ivy League universities, or not any of the known universities in the UK, you were not recognized in Nigeria. So all of us, all our degrees to PhD were from Nigerian universities. The pride was to say a PhD in Ibadan, first degree in University of Nigeria, Ahmadu Bello. The pride was local education.
That's true.
It was worse if you came from a university in certain parts of Asia. To Nigeria in the 1980s, you had to go back to another university in Nigeria for 1 year of studies before your master's degree in Asia was recognized. Now it's reversed. So both the legacy of structural adjustment for African economies, the poor governance, the poor management of our economies, the fact that we have not invested in the education sector, And there are a lot of it had to do with the different political transitions we've had in Africa over the years that saw the academia as a threat. And so the desire was to suppress and minimize the academia and limit the investments in education. We are reaping the fruits of all of those now. So the challenge for us now in Africa, as governments, as development actors, is to begin to reinvest in education, in science and technology, to begin to enable our professors the best of their knowledge. You know, I was challenged last week. Somebody said to me, have you had a dialogue with the research universities in Rwanda? And I haven't. I've met the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nigeria, that's right. I've met a few friends who are academics. But as I sit here, as the head of the United Nations system, we have no idea what the universities in Rwanda are producing for development. So without making a point that we need to have a dialogue with the universities, call it a knowledge and products fair. There's so much that knowledge that's being generated by the universities. And if our role as a United Nations system is upstream policy advice and analysis to the government, we need to know what's coming out of the ivory towers, and then together under the leadership of government to brainstorm what does it mean for us and how do you take it forward. So when I make the reference to Kepler University, for example, the new public service we should produce is a functional public service that's practical, hands-on, and that's the kind of things you see from Kepler. It should no longer be enough that you went to a university, you have a master's degree, you've entered the public service. So new conversations should be happening across the continent. And for me, the pride is that I'm preaching to the converted in terms of the majority of the people in this room, because this is the experiment that Rwanda is going through. So it's only for those who have come from outside Rwanda that I'm actually raising all of these issues, because this is the place to learn these experimentations.
That's very true, and I know you have some experience too, Dr. Musonda. Do you agree with this as well? What do you think should be the way forward?
No, thank you so much. I want to speak to the fact that a lot of times we talk about, education and knowledge systems as if our university degree is the ultimate.
Yeah.
And yet, the knowledge, part of the brain drain that we're losing in places we see, like the Lake Chad in parts of the Sahel, is our indigenous knowledge systems. And I think this came out very, very clearly when COVID hit. This was a continent that, for all intents and purposes, was deprived of vaccines, etc., and we did what we do best. We went back to our phytopharmacies, the plant in the wetland, the plant in the forest, the one that we have propagated from the forest into the garden, and most of these knowledge systems have been transferred either through a grandmother or someone or an uncle in the family, even to a younger generation. Now, what we've seen happen in places like the Sahel and also within the Lake Chad region, this mobility and drain of these knowledge systems, the new people that come in, even as we're trying to restore ecosystems, they're like, we don't know this area. This is not where I was born. I don't know this plant. I just need to get my water and get the cows to feed over there. And I want to talk about something that obviously Rwanda is very much well known for and had provided leadership, the banning of plastics. For all intents and purposes, I absolutely love that there's the basket culture. And the grass that we use for weaving baskets across any part of Africa comes from wetland systems. Now the technology, the knowledge, not technological in the terms of, phone, etc., but that whole mental technology of weaving is an exquisite technique, most of which is lost, either when the old people die or when the young people or the young person whose knowledge was transferred to disappears. Here we are talking about Europe wanting our products because they've realized how much plastics is just choking our fish, our rivers, everywhere. Now everybody's saying, let's be circular, let's be circular. Oh, we should buy some baskets from Tanzania. We should buy some baskets from that location. We should buy that material. We should go and get that grass. And for all intents and purposes, sometimes they're going into places where people are like, I don't know about that. I just buy the plastic bag. So we begin to see how losing these knowledge systems has implications, going around in a very secular way. So we have to really work towards how do we retain that? How do we exchange knowledge systems? Because our cultures have been very much interactive. It's really good to do that.
That's fantastic. I would like to take the debate to the floor as well. But before that, I wanted to thank you so much, Dr. Ozonnia. Thank you for joining us. Join me in thanking him for these excellent interventions. So allow me to go to the floor, and also I would love to hear from your experience, where you're coming from. If you can share some of your thoughts on the subject of today, migration and brain drain, please feel free to raise your hand and take the floor.
There's a lady over there.
Yes, please, if the MC can help us with the microphones. We are going to start with someone in the back, that side. Please introduce yourself, tell us your thought. If it's a question, tell us who you would like to address the question.
Thank you. My name is Professor Edwin Oduno. I'm from Mount Kenya University, Rwanda. Mine is a comment. First of all, and I want to thank the panelists for their insightful contribution. First, I don't think it is very easy to delink immigration and governance. As we talked, or we saw this morning, the two are intertwined in such a way that we have to look at the relationship between those two areas. Secondly, coming from Kenya, I know that there was a study that was conducted some years back, I don't know whether it was scientific or not, that shows about 70% of young Kenyan graduates are trying to leave the country. On the other hand, the country puts a lot of economic resources in training these young people, and yet they want to leave the country. So the other thing that we don't do, I think, is link economic opportunities in Africa to education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor from Mount Kenya University, linking economic opportunities with the migration. Very, very thoughtful. Let's take other, yes, that side, please.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much, the panelists. My name is Linda, SCP Linda Muranga, and my question goes to Professor Albert. So I'm just wondering if our fears are not really overblown. Is really Africa worse off because of the opportunity for skilled workers to migrate? We recall that most of the African leaders that fought for independence, some of them were themselves part of the brain drain. Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, the Nandi of Nigeria. So probably without brain drain, independence would have been received much later. So I'm just wondering, Professor, I wanted to have your thoughts. Does brain drain really explain Africa's skills gap with the rest of Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's take two more questions before coming back here on the stage. Yes, please.
Hello there, good afternoon. My name is Ismail Siad from Somalia. I'm a conflict analyst at Eastern Africa Standby Force. I wanted to raise a question which we Africans are no less business-minded than the people living on the rest of the world. There are millions of businesswomen and businessmen engaged in different areas of trade and business, locally and beyond. Unfortunately, there is no tools or frameworks, or if they are no functioning well. Those tools and frameworks that direct and channel those business communities into investing in the vast human or natural resources our continent can offer, and thus creating no opportunities for the young, forcing them to look for opportunities while outsourcing their expertise outside, let alone bring the diaspora back home. Well, we are aware of the problems, and we have raised a lot of them here. But my question is, what systems or approaches do we have in place to link those business communities to those resources? I mean, people with money that can invest in the resources, and those young people who are migrating outside looking for opportunities. So my question is, what systems or approaches do we have as a continental level that can link those resources?
Thank you so much. Very pertinent. Last question before we respond. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, the panelists. I am Major General Sikano from Botswana, and I'm going to make some contributions to this topic. Botswana perspective. Well, first of all, let's ask ourselves a question. Do you talk about brain drain, brain circulation, brain exchange, or brain gain? But here's brain drain. But let me say, a case of Botswana, from 1966 when we gained independence, when the country of Botswana was one of the poorest countries in the continent. We did not have many skilled, we did not have a skilled labor. And as such, during that period from 1966 to the year 2000, we gained from skilled labor from foreign nationals, because that was the time when we were developing. So the skills that we gained were the skills like for doctors, the miners, the teachers, the police. But in 2000, we embarked on a robust move to create an education, one of the education hubs in Southern Africa. So it saw 4 colleges growing into fully fledged universities so that we can develop skilled labor, because skilled labor is good for development, and we cannot dispute that. But where we stand right now is that the graduates from those universities have created what we can say oversubscription. We are oversubscribed with these skills. But the important thing to note is that despite the fact that we now have a lot of skilled labor, even in areas which were before we embarked on that education program, were deemed to be scarce. Botswana, most of Botswana still prefer to stay home. We have, of course, lost, or some of Botswana have migrated to other countries. But in most of the cases, it is the immigration to the neighboring countries. Countries such as South Africa, which it is estimated that by a study which was conducted in 2020, that we have about 73,000 in South Africa. And Zimbabwe, our neighbor in the north, about 3,000, and Zambia, about 1,000. Then the UK, about 3,000, and Australia, 1.5. But the question is, why are Botswana not living? Most of Botswana are not living, and from studies that have been conducted, it is said that, or it has been established, they don't leave because of robust economy and because of the political stability or long-standing political structure that Botswana has. So these are some of the reasons why they are not leaving. But we are also affected in a way that, since I said few, I have to address that few. What is this few, and where do they go? This few are talking of doctors, the nurses, and those from the aviation industry. As for the nurses, most of the nurses moved to the UK, where from the study that was conducted in 2022, it was established that 700 nurses have already pledged and registered to go and work in the UK. And there are unions, nurses unions, who are advocating for nurses to migrate to go and work in the UK, citing issues of not really appetizing remunerations. And this now this shows us that there is a policy gap, because UK is recruiting nurses to fill its 40,000 gap for nurses in the UK. And here in Africa, we have trained these people with the resources of Africa. That is, when they go, it's lost investment and lost skills. Lost skills in that some of the institutions, like we're talking of institutions and the money, definitely they'll be affected because they need skills, people to propel them to the next heights. So this is what I want to contribute regarding our team in Botswana, but I want to end up by saying, you know, yes, the reality is that when you talk of brain exchange, looking at the situation of Botswana, because most of them, most of the immigrants, they work in the neighboring countries, like I've said. And most of Botswana, they don't go, they return home. It's temporary immigration. They come back home. And when they come back home, obviously they are going to plow what they learned, what they gained in those countries. So then when you talk of the policy gap here, it now tells us that as Africans that we must come up with policies that enable us to harness from the feedback effects from the skilled labor, compensating for the lost skilled labor and for the lost investment that we have put forth. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General, for your thought and for sharing your experience of Botswana. Indeed, doing a very good job in building a robust economy. We'll come back to that question. So let me summarize and go back to my panel. Director General Linder has asked Professor Albert to comment on the brain drain. Is it really a fear for Africa? And perhaps you can also respond to the question from the gentleman from the EASF, the regional force, in terms of the tools and framework for the business communities in investing locally. And Ambassador Monique, you can also touch on the systems or framework to link business community and the diaspora. And lastly, perhaps, Doctor, you can comment on the loss of doctors and nurses that the General touched on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Several young people are leaving. And anytime I travel, I turn the exercise into a form of research You know, I interview young people living, where are you going to? I'm going to so place to do what? I mean, I still saw a young guy yesterday in Nairobi, actually traveling abroad with his family members from Nigeria. I was recently traveling to the US, and we passed through Qatar. And as we came down from the aircraft and we entered the airport, I could see some school children from Nigeria actually saying things that were not good. So I stopped them, I talked to them, and they were actually thanking God for living. My second son, you know, when I have visitors, prominent people visiting me, they listen to the conversations, because most of the time I have people saying, please, we have this assignment for you, leave. And I will say no. Now, when I could not send my first son to school in America, it created a conflict between me and my second son. He was admitted in America, I could not pay the fees. He was admitted in Canada, I could not pay. He was admitted in Australia, and I was assisted to pay the school fees. Now, early one morning, his immediate junior brother came to my room, and he stood by the door, he pointed his hand at me, I said, look at you. You told us you are not going to build houses for us. You told us you will not do this. You promised to give us education. Look at Biola's life. You have destroyed it. And it touched me as a father that I decided not to do what other people are doing, but now a failure. I became a professor in 2006. Check me online. I'm one of the best in my field of study. Do a Google search. I am one of the biggest in the world in security studies. But I'm telling you, I cannot feed well. I don't feed well because my pay is so little. It's so little. So our children, for those of us who are in the university, they are not actually going to the academia. All of them are running away from Nigeria. Our children, because they see the kind of life we are living. You know, a professor wearing a trouser that was bought 10 years ago, and then praising himself. You know, he wears the clothes, we are making jest of him. He says, this is one of the best in the world. You know, this brand was made by so company. So we have been reduced to the level where life is impossible. So young people are living, and we cannot blame them for living. And when they grow up in the developed world, now they are appearing to some of us as those that we save money to buy our coffins. Because back home, the resources are not there to give you decent burial. So the young ones are living, we are not quarreling with them. Now, for the issue of, for the nationalists, I hope we're not getting it wrong. Our nationalists schooled abroad because we did not have that type of citadel, you know, that kind of academic institutions. They schooled abroad, came back home to establish universities. My university was established in 1948. Legon was established in 1948. And other universities were established by these people. But I think Dr. Ojielo called attention to the problem. In my country, we started having problems with our political leaders because the educated elite started presenting itself like the opposition. You know, our political leaders would not want a situation where you are analyzing their problems, or where you are calling attention to the implications of the things they do. And to be able to manage us well, they decided to peg us down so much that we do not grow beyond where we're expected to grow. Our capacity for evil is managed by giving us poor conditions of service. And so now, the best scientists in my university have their laboratories in Germany, in England, in Canada. They are teaching in Ibadan, but their laboratories are outside because the system will not give them a good laboratory. So this is what is happening. So it is not, we cannot actually say the nationalists, their own case is not that of brain drain. But what we call brain drain now is for you to produce a large number of students. I mean, in my country, we produce thousands of medical doctors every year. But within 6 months, you have only a few of them left. If you give me 2 minutes more, because you're looking at me, do you want me to stop?
No, I want to also come back to you in a few minutes because this is very important, the point on losing doctors and nurses. I really want you to comment on that because I know that you have some perspective on that.
Actually, I wanted to comment to the point that Ishmael raised on trade.
Okay, so go ahead on trade and we'll come back to Monique on losing that.
Okay, no, thank you very much. So one of the programs that we designed within the United Nations was, that many people have heard about, is the Great Green Wall of the Sahel. Now, for all intents and purposes, the Sahel is an arid region, so is the area that is where the Lake Chad Basin is, which is also part of the Sahel. Back to the trade issue. So let me talk about the Africa Free Trade Agreement. There's a lot of products that have come, you know, beautiful and amazing products that come from this continent. Baobab oil is one of them. I use it every day. It's been studied so extensively in Europe because it has the very 3 omegas and it's an anti-aging oil, which for all intents and purposes, Europe wants to receive it in barrels, not properly packaged. The same with funu, which is a grain that comes from the Sahel, which is now being coined as a superfood. The same with moringa. So how we negotiate at the trading table also matters. For me, what we're beginning to see in many ecosystems, in many spaces, is that the conversation around trading of natural resources is also very important. A lot of the food loss and food waste that's happening in areas, in farms where young people, we're encouraging young people to go farming. They're not interested. They cannot process. There is no capability of processing. There is no capability of packaging, etc. We don't have. So how do we encourage that even our development partners are investing in having these processing facilities on the continent and the skilling and knowledging of that? I come from Zambia. We had the USA Africa discussion where the presidents went, et cetera, and discussed. We have rare earth, we have cobalt, we have lithium. Everybody's now discussing the issue of, you know, electric cars. Let's have the factories in Africa.
That's right.
Let's do the work here. Let's produce everything here. Because the moment we give the raw material out, then all you have is what you see in Congo, for example, is just the labor force and people are dying because of what we've seen also with the landslides, because the ecosystem is degraded.
I'm so glad you touched on the trade CFTA. But Monique, you can also comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I'm always inspired by President Paul Kagame's quote. During his recent visit to Benin, President Paul Kagame shared with 100 young entrepreneurs an insightful message about investing inward and combating the brain drain that many African countries continue to suffer from. So he said, I quote, "You talked about brain drain. Ask yourself, why is there that brain drain? That flow means something. How about if you provided what is attracting people on the other side?" So he said, adding, if there is a brain drain, it is because there is a brain here in the first place, here that is just being drained outward. So let's now invest in this brain, end of quote. So as the professor was saying, you can't retain these doctors, you can't retain these skilled professionals if we don't invest in it. So investing in it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get exactly what these skilled people are looking for on the other side. But you have to invest in getting them the minimum to survive. You have to invest in encouraging them to build their own nation. Because as you have said, even if these people migrate to these Western countries, they are not getting decent jobs. They're just doing whatever they find there. And I'm sure some of them would like to come back. But you need to invest in meeting them, discussing with them, giving them opportunities when they come back. As I've said, I've seen now many Rwandans living abroad coming back to invest in Rwanda, coming back to share their experience, coming back to transfer knowledge, transfer skills. So all this needs a real investment, and this is what our president used to say: we have to invest in this brain gain.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Let's go back to the floor to take a couple of more questions. Do not hesitate. N'hésitez pas à utiliser la langue que vous voulez. Si vous voulez parler en français, il y a des traducteurs au fond. Allez-y, il y a une personne au fond. À gauche, s'il vous plaît.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. My name is Frederick Goroba Mtevi. I'm an independent researcher. I would like to ask a question and make a comment. Now, with regard to the comments made by the officer from Botswana, I mean, it sounded as if you were regretting or lamenting the departure of 700 nurses from Botswana to the UK. On the surface, that looks justified, but I was wondering whether this couldn't be seen as an opportunity for Botswana. The opportunity being that given there is high demand for your nurses, you could see this as an opportunity to train nurses who then get deliberately exported as skilled labor. Now, this has two advantages for Botswana in that remittances from these people are going to be to constitute a good contribution to Botswana's revenue generation, but also when these people eventually retire and return to Botswana, they could constitute a pool of skilled people who can then train more nurses. This could be simply a strategy that Botswana could use, and this could be taken advantage of by other African countries so that we don't see the departure of some of our compatriots as necessarily something to be regretted. Now, the other thing is, I've been fascinated by Monique Mukaruliza's mention of Rwanda mapping its diaspora and therefore knowing where they live and the skills they have. It reminded me of conversations I've had over the years with Ugandans living abroad. I lived in South Africa for a few years, and I lived in one of the poorest regions of South Africa in Mpumalanga province. And I found so many Ugandan doctors working in rural hospitals in the middle of nowhere in South Africa. And these are the same people who wouldn't go to work in rural hospitals in Uganda. And I was really fascinated to ask them, why is it they can live in such isolated places in South Africa, but not in Uganda? And the answer was very simple. They all said, look, the issue is that here in South Africa, you feel that you can be a doctor and practice your trade in the right way because the hospitals are well equipped, and they're also supplied with the necessary supplies that are needed, which is not the case in Uganda. And so listening to Monique talking about mapping of Rwandans in the diaspora and their skills and them being attracted to come back and contribute made me think that actually, while we lament the departure of Africans from our countries to go elsewhere, including in other African countries, we could also be very intentional in attracting them back. And so the question for me, and I hope that Monique, you can tell some of us who come from elsewhere, what can we learn from this? How did Rwanda arrive at this decision to actually proactively map its diaspora, know where they are, know what skills they have, and take advantage of that? Thanks.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. We'll come back to that question. Yes, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you, PS. I was told by friends in the touristic sector that there are talks about one universal passport, African passport, and also free movement, of course, in the future, like the EU. I know it will be doing very good for tourists, for the tourist sector, but what will it do to, what impact will it have on this issue that we are talking about, on the brain gain or brain drain? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll come back to that question. Let's take two more questions. I see lots of interest, so we are going up there to just have an opportunity, give an opportunity to everyone in the back, and we'll come back to the floor.
The name is Kelvin, Professor Kelvin Ononga, Adventist University of Central Africa, AOKA. I'd like to speak to the question of migration and speak basically towards the point of embracing what is inevitable, like one of the presenters has mentioned. Recently, I read an article that said there were American pilots that were migrating to work in China. And there is such a great need for them. And because the income they're going to make there is going to be like about $300,000 US, what they will not make back at home. Back at home in America, they're underpaid and they're a dime a dozen. Nobody's complaining about brain drain. Nobody's saying America is suffering from brain drain because its pilots are going to China. So why are we complaining about factors that are motivated by need? There's a need for nurses and doctors in the UK, in Australia, in the US, so they go there. Where they are, do we provide enough jobs for them, to keep them, to maintain them, to satisfy them? If we don't, we shouldn't complain. Also like to mention the fact that it's opportunities that these persons are responding to. And as long as the opportunities are there, the globalized economy that we're living in should allow these persons go there, interact with their colleagues, gain experience, and come back. In the early 80s, my prof from Nigeria, by the way, I'm Nigerian too, will attest to the fact that in the 80s, we had a migration of nurses and doctors to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, and to other countries. Yes. There was a great need then. These persons came back 10, 20 years later with plenty of experience to better their own economy. Meanwhile, the doctors and the nurses in Saudi Arabia and the other Middle Eastern countries were groomed and prepared for better service. So there's a gain everywhere you look at it, whether it's for those who move or those who receive. Everybody gains at the end of the day. Another interesting thing I found out was while completing my studies in the US over a decade ago, I met a young man who told me, he discovered I was Nigerian and said, my dream is to go to work in Nigeria. And I looked at this guy as if he was a lunatic, an American. Why would you be going to Nigeria? And he said, I want to go work for Dangote. That's what he said. And he said, he had his MBA. He said, I've done the math. I've seen Nigeria has a stronger GDP than South Africa. I said, no, South Africa has. He said, no, that was years ago. Now it's Nigeria. I want to go there. That's where I want to make my money. So I said, I need to tell my Nigerian colleagues to come hear what this American is saying. We have no problem when they come to Africa, isn't it? Why do you have a problem when they go there? As long as their needs, on whatever side of the continent or country, let's embrace them. Skilled workers come and they benefit the communities where they are. Embrace them and let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interventions. Let's take one last intervention before coming back to the panel. Yes. Here, please.
Thank you, the moderator. I'm Ojelo from South Sudan People Defense Force. My question goes to Dr. Mumba. As she talks of the Nile water, the wetlands, and the environmental ecosystems. I would like talks of my country. We have a Sudan that was recognized by UNESCO. And in 1978, there was a project that was initiated that the Sudanlands does not allow the volume of water to flow. It led to the reason why we took arms against the governments to stop the projects. And as you mentioned that the water might cause war later on, to connect with the use of the water along the Niles. There are some details that you cannot, you've been detailed how to use those water that are actually for developmental, that can help in one way or other. So my question goes to you that what could be the best way to address this issue of scrambling for Nile water? Thank you.
Thank you so much, General. All right, so let's go back to the panel right now, starting with Ambassador Monique. How did Rwanda manage to attract diaspora back?
Thank you so much, Dr. Goloba, for the question. As I told you, the Rwandan community abroad is one of the pillars of the Rwanda foreign policy. And for that reason, Rwanda considers its citizens living abroad as relevant in the Taglo constituency of the country. And Rwanda recognizes the vital role they play in the political and socio-economic development of the country. The idea of mapping the Rwandan diaspora, it was a follow-up of different visits our president had with the Rwandan diaspora before the COVID-19. Rwanda used to organize Rwanda Day. So Rwanda Day was held on an annual basis in a different part of the world. 1 year, Rwanda Day was organized in America, and all the Rwandan living in America, whether in US or in Canada, they used to meet our president in an identified place within America. Maybe the following year, the Rwanda Day was organized in Europe, and all the Rwandans living in Europe met the president in an organized place. And following those Rwanda Days, it was realized that Rwanda community abroad was willing to contribute to the socio-economic development of Rwanda. And in the different interventions So Rwandans were asking our president, you know, we have skills. Why don't you facilitate us to come and contribute to the development of the country? And then from that, we found that there is a need to map those Rwandans where they are so that we can identify what skills do them have, what knowledge, technology they have acquired, and link them with the gaps we have in the country. So we managed to do this mapping in collaboration with our OEM. And finally, we, in collaboration with our embassies, it was easier to map the Rwandans where they are. We have identified their skills. And now, as I have said, wherever we have a skills gap, we will invite them in the health sector, in TVET, in engineering. So we'll invite them because we know where they are. We have their contact. We know how to approach them. And themselves, they feel that Rwanda has valued them. So they feel as it's a proud to be part of the development of the country while they are outside the country. So I think this is what
fabulous.
I can share.
I think you can share a quick experience on that, because I can say I'm a product of Rwanda Day, per se. I was part of that Rwanda Day. I was, I educated, I graduated in Europe, lived in Europe, and I attended for the first time Rwanda Day. And when you comes back to the brain gain or attracting back to the diaspora, this is exactly what Ambassador Monique is saying. You feel like you can contribute back to your countries. You are giving a seat on the table. I'm now a permanent secretary of Foreign Affairs. I would have never imagined being here, but because of the trust, the confidence, and the leadership that is going to the diaspora and trying to explain and being part, bringing the youth part of the development, this is exactly, I think, we should do more in the African continent in terms of building the future in a sustainable way. So I think it's something that we need to build upon and continue. There was a question from Ambassador Juan, the ambassador of Israel here. I can direct that to Dr. Musonda. It was about the Universal African Passport and the AU, perhaps, or Professor as well, you can comment on that.
And the passport?
Yes, the passport, the AU passport. If I got it well, Ambassador.
Well, I published a paper many years ago when African Union was planning to become, turn the continent into the EU type of political system, a United States of Africa. And I remember saying that then that it may not work, because we are divided in Africa by several factors. Our colonial history. When I say colonial history, I will refer to my role as a mediator in this continent, where you are discussing with the French-speaking Anglophone. Sometimes the French-speaking Africans would not give you a yes answer. In most cases, they ask France, what the answer should be. This is my practical experience across the continent. So we are divided by our colonial history, and then we are divided by our level of development. Some parts of Africa are more developed than the others. So if we say we want to have a United States of Africa, you would find everybody from one part moving to another part. And you might not have the kind of structure that you have in Europe, where they are evenly developed and the level of migration is not as conflictogenic as we will see here in Africa. So that is my simple response to it. But I want to key into the Rwanda experience you have shared with us. Let me use this opportunity to really commend this country. because I've been following the development of the country, and I think this is the direction in which we should go. And it made me this morning to agree with one of us who said, democracy does not necessarily translate into development. Because what we're told, I mean, the third wave of democratization, what the theory said was that, well, once you democratize, then development will follow. We all democratized as a result of third wave of democratization in the 1990s, but some of us are poorer because it is wrongly assumed that once you have an election, automatically development will follow. It's highly debatable. What we have discovered is that even when you vote, when you conduct a free and fair election, you do not automatically have responsible leadership. Because the leaders that have won the election will go their own way. Some of them will be asking for fourth time. You know, they'll be asking all kinds of questions. Some of them will engage in corruption. Some of them will engage in all kinds of things that set their country back. In Rwanda, we see development, and that is all we want to see. Now, Dr. Ojielo was with us in Accra in February. In the last 3-4 months, we've had about 4 or 5 security summits across the continent talking about different things. He came to the one in Accra, and he gave us excellent example of what is happening in this country. And he made one point, and the point is that there is a lot for Africa to learn from Rwanda. And I think this is the point we are making, that we have succeeded in this country to make some people come back. Now, we need to scientifically understand how they are coming back. You have given us, you know, some reasons and why they are coming back. Now, they are coming back, one, because there is an institutional framework for their coming back. So it is not just a matter of just appealing to them to come back, and then you leave them. But when you tell them to come back, you put in place a framework for their reinsertion into their community. Now, if they want to go into business, what is the level of friendliness of the business environment? If they come in, if they come in to invest, and if their investment are not actually yielding any good result, they will go back. And those who go back the second time are very difficult to bring back. I've met several of them. They will tell you we will never come back. So it is not just a matter of talking about it. We want to see how you are doing it. And I think in that regard, we need to commend this country. Last point, a very short one. Now, we are holding this meeting because a command and staff college has invited us here. The question I ask myself is, what is the take-home for the defense industry? The take-home for the defense industry, which I shared with Defense College in Abuja in February when they invited me to discuss migration and development in Africa, is to say that foreign fighters are very mobile in Africa. They are moving from one country to the other. Unfortunately, those of us studying migration, we are yet to really focus our attention on foreign fighters. I was in Senegal in January, and I heard stories of how people were coming from, I don't want to mention any country, coming from the extreme West Africa to come and fight in Nigeria, to fight for Boko Haram. They fight for 2 days, and then they go back on Thursday or Friday to go and rest. And the next week, they come back to fight. Now, those of us studying migration must now begin to show interest in studying foreign fighters. Where are these people coming from? Who is motivating them? Because foreign fighters, to me, will fit into our discourse of brain drain. These people are highly knowledgeable. I've interviewed them in detention. They are very, very knowledgeable people. So you don't just think these are ordinary fighters. They are not ragtag fighters. They are very informed people. Now, how do we, as defense colleges, begin to study them? Who is motivating them? Why are they fighting? Where are they moving to? What are their trajectories? and so on. Thank you for giving me this extra minute.
Thank you, Professor. That's
Okay.
fantastic. Yes, please.
No, thank you very much. I want to respond to the two questions. There's one that Professor Kevin mentioned, and also the gentleman from South Sudan. First, I want to start with the issue of America. I think we also have to acknowledge that America, for all intents and purposes, the United States of America, is a country of immigrants. And there is a movie, a very interesting movie called A Day Without the Mexican, when the Mexicans just down their tools. And recently I was in Mexico, and I was also in part of the United States. For those of you that may not be aware, parts of the United States are drying. The Colorado River Basin, Texas, and the internal mobility is very intense. People in Texas, if you can't get water, or in Arizona, you're moving up north to the Great Lakes, where there is water. So you begin to see how these challenges, how you grow food, how you have your labor force, etc. But your point on saying that people shouldn't complain, we also have to go back to the first panel that talked about issues of governance, issues of governance and leadership. What is the minimum wage of an American? What is the minimum wage of someone in the EU? What is the minimum wage of a Zambian? What is the minimum wage generally of an African? So people, for all intents and purposes, would like to come back. And this example that Mr. Alfred gave from South Africa, the doctors, the Ugandan doctors in rural South Africa, if they have the resources, even the enabling environment that makes them stay, they will stay. The issue of the Nile, thank you so much for bringing that up. Yesterday, just before I actually left for Kigali, I had a meeting with Engineer Matemu, who is the executive director of the Nile Basin, for that very reason, because the Nile waters are very, very important. The sources of this river, this precious river that covers the third world's largest river basin, with over almost 300 million people, from parts of the headwaters of Rwanda, going into Uganda as it exits Jinja. The governance mechanism, particularly having the NILECOM, the ministers in this region, how you converse, but also the science. I did a lot of work on the Nile where, for all intents and purposes, and it's a security issue because quite a number of the military people sit on some of the tables around Nile water issues. The issue of data. A number of countries will not share it for security reasons. And they'll tell you that. We're not going to share this data. We're not going to share information on how you model a river. I'm a wetland hydrologist. All I did was modeling rivers. And so, some of these issues, how do we come to the table together? We've seen unfortunately and very tragically, may people's souls rest in peace, in Sudan with Darfur. Darfur is also a crisis of droughts, water, and also related to resource allocation and complexities that is manifesting in a very problematic way. The Sud is a Ramsar site under our convention, the Jangoli Canal, which I'm very familiar with. This is a beautiful and stunning wetland system, which for all intents and purposes is also a massive evapotranspiration space that provides a lot of water into the Nile system. So we cannot afford not to talk about how we manage these systems and the implications for our very existence and also for abating the conflicts that could emerge from these spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for touching on that. So we still have a few minutes again to kind of go back to the floor for final thoughts and contributions. Yes, sir, on this side. Could introduce yourself and direct your questions to one of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. A comment and also a question. The first is the comment emanating from the question of the ambassador on free movement. I don't think the African Union has abandoned the protocol on free movement of persons in Africa. That continues to be an ongoing discussion among member states of the African Union. It was also delegated to the regions. As Professor knows, they have an ECOWAS passport. The other regions are also developing their own protocols on free movement. So if you have free movement first in the regions, then you can have free movement on the continent much later. coming to the question on migration, is it really an issue for us? Is that the most important issue we should be debating? That a few doctors, a few nurses have moved here and there, whereas we have the continent with the youngest population, so we should be thinking of training more so that if they go, we have some that remain. In terms of the African Union has been engaged in this migration debate, and in 2021 launched the African Center for the Study and Research in Migration, which is in Bamako, Mali. It was launched in March 2021. We also have the African Migration Observatory, which was launched in December 2021 in Rabat, Morocco, to address the issue of migration. But the question I keep asking, is migration an issue for us?
Sure.
I don't think it's an issue for us. Simply because if you come from a continent that has the youngest population, there will be migration. You also have a continent that has challenges in terms of governance. Therefore, I think we should look at migration from the perspective that the diaspora has something to contribute in terms of what is left in Africa. So I would tell the professor, yes, your first son is going abroad. Perhaps he should get a job there and help you pay for the education of the second. We do it the African way, social capital.
Thank you so much.
Finally, I think in terms of the skills mapping, that would be an extremely important. And in particular, rather than simply mapping what has gone abroad to the West, are we mapping the skills that are here on the continent? And are we developing, as the Pan-African University began with recognition across boundaries of degrees? I think Professor knows the problems that are there of accreditation. Even those who went to Botswana to teach, or even those who are teaching in other countries, the accreditation and recognition of African degrees and African qualifications. I think that is where we should begin and build up on African solidarity. If you have a shortage of engineers, where can you get engineers in Africa? And in particular, a place where culturally, socially, and linguistically, you have a more integrated and harmonious migration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your excellent perspective. Let's take more questions. Yes, this side, please.
Thank you very much, panelists. I'm much impressed by the topic, which is actually brain drain. But I would like to bring it to the context, security challenges. I'm imagining the smart brain that we think tend to leave their own countries in search for good opportunities. They are professionals. They are running away from bad policies, poor governance. Actually, it's like I'm addressing this to Dr. Albert because he will satisfy my, my concern. So, if we are seeing smart brain, professionals, skilled people, running away from poor policies, bad governance, poverty. Now, I see such people as those ones who want to harvest what they have not actually taken part in having in place. Why can't we embrace the spirit of nationalism? Because this is a security challenge. We are talking of how can we address brain drain as an African, as a security challenge in African perspective. So to me, I would say that much emphasis should be put in actually developing a society of smart brain that is actually that is much taken up by the spirit of loving their own countries, being part of the solutions that can actually bring in place good governance, that can bring in place good policies, because there are many ways of getting involved. We shouldn't be saying that these people are running away because their countries are not giving them much. They are not seeing the opportunities of getting involved. How? If you have that smart brain, use it in your own way, but with that nationalism kind of, so that you can contribute to that desired change. So, Dr. Albert, if you can satisfy my need in terms of that perspective, I think I will be much
Very good.
happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's take one more last question. I really want the ladies in the room. I see many of you. So let's have a gender-balanced interventions. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Thank you, moderator. I'm Alice Urusaro Karekezi. I'm a lecturer at the the University of Rwanda. Mine is compliments to the interventions related to movement of population back and forth. I agree with all the interventions about the incentive structures that needs to be there for the skilled population to accept to remain in a place. But Rwanda tells also a story of people coming to support their country rather than only gain from them. So I would like here to, as Professor Olawale has mentioned, to deepen a little bit more the question of why people leave and why people come back. If I look at the experiences of the last 20 years, yes, we have had Rwanda Day. Yes, the diaspora has moved back. But before that diaspora moved back, Rwandans have come back to reconstruct a devastated country. So it will be a full story if we can also study the reasons why people abandon much competitive salaries, much comfortable lives, and came back to this country to make it also what it has become. It means the country everybody wants to come and see, including that young diaspora. So we still need to theorize and analyze that for Professor, why Rwanda moved back to this country that were on ashes, that was on ashes, and what else, in addition to an incentive structures, in addition to a good work environment, in addition to opportunities, make people come back and build a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. All right, so let's come back to the panel. I will start with Professor.
Well, I think I have to thank all of you for the observations. If we have to do a book on this subject matter, I don't think all of us will be saying the same thing. I could see here some people saying there is something good in brain drain. Some people saying it is not too good. Some people are saying that, yes, it is inevitable, but we can actually put in place structures for managing it better. So I don't want you to accuse me of monocausal explanation. I'm not saying it is totally bad, but the point I'm making is that, to me, it's a problem for Africa because we need human capital for actually developing and growing this society. And those who should be developing Africa are there all over the world. What I've noticed in my own study is that when these people leave, within a few years, their African passports are taken away from them, and they are given golden passports. Now, when your passport is thrown away, it shows that there is something for us to worry about. Now, I agree with you, sir, that when our children leave, there is the possibility of their coming back to assist us. And I think that is what is happening to me. My first son left, but when my second son got a government employment in Lagos, the rent for 1 year is higher than the annual pay. That is to say, the rent you will pay is higher than what the government will pay you for the entire year. And so when he told me, I said, look, do they have people on this job? I said, there are many. Then how are they surviving in Lagos? He said, they are surviving by their brains. And I told him, you will not survive by that type of brain. But my first son, who is in Australia, sent the rent for 1 year, which is higher than his salary for 1 year. Now, he said, I am investing on him. So in other words, for the next 1 year, the young man is literally not earning anything. But he is also expected to get streetwise on the job and then be able to pay his rent the following year. I don't think that is the way any country should develop our young ones. For us to leave them to their, strategies of survival, it is not the best way. So I commend Rwanda for developing the strategies for actually bringing these young people back. And I think other Africans should come to study Rwanda, most especially how they were able to bring you back here.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, Ambassador Monique.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I would like also to comment on the question or respond part of it, whether migration is a concern for Africa today. When we talk about migration, I think we forget that some of the Africans, young ones, they want to leave Africa, not in a safe or orderly manner. Today, Rwanda is hosting migrants that came from Libya. Rwanda has established the emergency transit mechanism in Gashora. This is in the eastern part of the country. So to receive vulnerable migrants evacuated from Libya in partnership with the UNHCR and the African Union. So I think that all of us in this room know how these people were treated. These are young people. They were treated, very bad treated in Libya. So now Rwanda had to intervene and establish this emergency transit mechanism. So we can't ignore that when migration is done not in a safe or in an unsafe way, it is very dangerous for Africans, especially for our young Africans. In the same spirit, there are migrants who are illegal migrants. They left Africa, others left the Middle East, others left their countries where there is insecurity, and they arrived in UK in small boats. Very dangerous journey. So now Rwanda has entered into partnership with the UK in order to receive those relocated individuals who are illegally migrants in the UK. So you can understand that migration is a very concern for Africa and for the world, since we are losing life. We are losing life because these young people, they want to go to Europe, they want to go to Western countries using these unsafe ways. So it should be really a big concern in terms of security. And what I can say is that because of these dangerous journeys, this is empowering criminal people smuggling networks. Yes. And you know that you have to combat this human trafficking. So I think in this context, we have to be concerned about migration. Thank you.
Yeah, quite an important element you have brought in the discussion, those dangerous journeys and the loss of lives of your young brothers and sisters, African, being killed in search of better opportunities. Yes, Doctor, you wanted to comment?
Yes, please. No, I'll be very brief. I think one of the things that we haven't touched about is even the gender dimension of migration and brain drain. I want to respond to the gentleman, I didn't hear his name when he made the intervention. I don't think migration is a problematic issue. I think we as Africans and peoples of this continent for hundreds and thousands of years, we've intermarried, moved, you know, Shaka Zulu and his brothers, I think they migrated from somewhere and moved south, and then the brothers fought, and then they moved back north, and the mixing is impressive. What I want to say in this modern age, I think what we see is we're losing a lot of, and you talk about youth. Indeed, we do have a youth dividend on this continent, which is impressive and amazing, and a brilliant opportunity for Africa. We are potentially the next superpower as a continent, just because of that dividend. Unfortunately, we're also losing our young men, because, I mean, for all intents and purposes, for many of the European cities I've walked across, I've not seen a young lady sleeping rough on the street, because you're thinking, I am not going to cross the Sahara, risk my life, get raped, potentially even be killed. It is our young men, our able-bodied young men who have left. And so how do we also retain them and make them stay? One of the things that I did in 2019, together with a few friends of mine within and outside of the United Nations, is to set up a network called the Network of African Women Environmentalists. And this network was to also really begin to also create a database of who are the experts, because for all intents and purposes, even when I was in the United Nations, I was being asked, can you come and speak at this event? Can you come and tell us examples of what women are doing on the ground, in which community, in South Sudan, in Mali, in Mauritania, in Angola? I say there are so many people and young women and youth that are doing. We will give you the name, and we will give you that individual and their able skills. So it's important that this kind of information is consolidated and shared, but also these young people are also encouraged, which is why we're seeing, I think most of the climate activists and the youth environmentalists are most of them coming from Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your thought. I'm told that we are almost reaching the end of this section, but I wanted to kind of wrap up this very interesting conversation. There's a lot of ideas that we have been exchanging. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a security threat? It looks like there's lots of debate and controversies. Maybe Professor will develop a new book on that to help us. But I wanted a new book. And I encourage you to read his latest book, Action Migration, very interesting one. Let's share the final thoughts, the key takeaway from this session. And I will go back to my panel. What do we need to leave, to take from this panel? What are we telling the youth, the young generations, the military and security organs on that very important subject of migration and brain drain? I will start with Professor before going to Doctor and Monique.
Well, my takeaway is to say that migration is a peace and security issue. It's often taught in departments of geography and so on, but we are saying that peace and defense colleges must see it as a multi-sectoral problem. Because when people move, they move with their problems, they move with their frustrations. And the manner in which they also move could also constitute a security problem. Mm-hmm. If you will allow me, I was a federal delegate to the 2014 National Conference in Nigeria. We're trying to find solutions to Nigeria's problems. We invited I was in the Committee on Immigrations and Related Matters. So we invited the health of immigration in Nigeria, to talk to us about the military operations in the Northeast. And he said in that corridor alone, they had 157 illegal routes into Nigeria, through which fighters could come into Nigeria from different parts of the Sahel. And I put the question to him, this information that you are providing this committee, have you ever given it to the military? He said no. Then, what role do you play in the multinational joint task force? He said, if the military discover anybody that is not a Nigerian and they do not want to jail him, they give them to us and we deport them. Now, we now told him that you must share this information with the military because the military constitutes the body that is fighting those coming in. So they must know the routes through which these people are coming in. And then we gave him two options. The first option is for you to have a unit within your immigration that has the capacity for military combat operations. The weapons must be different, the training must be different, but they must be able to fight anybody coming into Nigeria to join Boko Haram. That was the first option we gave to him. The second option we gave him is, are you ready to train a battalion in the Nigerian army to know what you immigration people do, how you manage your borders? Then he opted for having a group, a unit in the immigration trained to be able to do combat operations. And we gave him that option. It was recommended. But the new regime that came in threw away the report. The point we're trying to make is that security, aspects are merging. Immigration, customs, because the troublemakers that we are fighting, I call them troublemakers, rather than telling you terrorists, insurgents, violent extremists. These people, they are very, very intelligent, and they achieve their goals through surprise element. And if they achieve their goals through surprise element, then we must have a broad knowledge for knowing who they are, how they operate. We are currently doing a project sponsored by British Academy on the fighting patterns of ISWAP in Nigeria, and then the Islamic states of Greater Sahara in the other parts of, and the findings are quite interesting. So these people, they are very smart, they are moving, and it's like the society is not taking enough time to understand how they are moving, why they are moving, and the implications of why they are moving. So let us match different aspects of security.
Thank you so much, Professor. Ambassador Monique, in a few words, you can also tell us the key takeaway.
Yeah, my key takeaway is that migration in both directions will continue to be a defining feature of the relationship between countries. And the best long-term approach to making migration orderly, safe, and mutually beneficial is to commit to working together to rectify the imbalance in human capital opportunities that underlie the current crisis. So in a globalized world, all countries are looking for free movement of people. So with that free movement of people, people will move from countries to countries, and we need to invest on the way to mitigate the negative impact of the migration.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Doctor?
No, thank you so much. I really must commend the Rwanda Defense Forces and the college in particular for organizing this meeting, but it's your 10th year anniversary. I think that there is power in consolidating a lot of the lessons that you have undertaken, or the experiences and the different speakers you really have had over the 10 years, because I think most of the outcomes of those experiences are feeding into what is a future fit Africa? What does it look like? What does it look, what does this secure, whether it be digital, cyber security, environmental security, climate change? I think it would be fantastic. Time it could be a Africa-wide symposium, because I love the national symposium, but for all intents and purposes, this is a Pan-African event, and I must say congratulations, because your wisdom is impressive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is perfect conclusion for this panel discussion. Please help me give a round of applause of my panel. Thank you so much for the conversations. It was very enlightening, and I will go back to the MC for the next course of events. Thank you.